Hello, my name is Graham Stark. I'm one of the DD309 tutors. Today I'm making a short introductory video about Gretl. Gretl is a computer program used for the statistics part of the course. Statistics for economists is called econometrics, so it's the Gretl econometrics package. And you get Gretl from here. Website, so you go to the DD309 website, go to resources and scroll about halfway down. Here's the Gretl download. So if you haven't installed Gretl by now, you might want to go there and do that. That's the Windows version that's used in the course. If you want to work on another platform, or you want the very latest version, go to Gretl's website, which is gretl.sourceforge.net, and here you'll find Mac, Linux and the very latest Windows versions. Here they are here. To install the Windows version, just click on the thing you've downloaded. I'll defer to Mac people about how you install there. Gretl doesn't run on phones or tablets, unfortunately. When you click to start it up, Gretl looks like this. Let's find Gretl. Here is Gretl in the middle of the screen here. It's not very interesting as you just start it up. To get something interesting, you need some data, and I was wondering what sort of data to pick. I thought of some data that might help with Chapter 2 to make Chapter 2 come alive a little. When you read Chapter 2, you come across some very abstract ideas about budget constraints and difference curves, demand curves and the like. It's hard to imagine any real application of these things to the real world, or any real purpose to them. Perhaps we can change that with Gretl and some data. Here's a page from Chapter 2. Sorry about the delay there. This is a page from Chapter 2 of the book. You may not have read this far, but don't worry about that. What's this about? Essentially, it's showing that as income goes up, spending on particular goods changes. It can go up, in which case the good is classified as a normal good, or it can go down, as in the second diagram here, in which case it's classified as an inferior good. If spending rises very fast on the good as income goes up, normal goods are subclassified as luxury goods. Now this matters for economic policy. An inferior good will take up a lot of the income of poorer households, which make it hard to tax. Food, tobacco and domestic fuel might be examples. So can we take this very abstract thing and make it real? Can we classify actual goods into inferior, normal and luxury? Yes, we can. We can use the Living Costs and Food Survey for that, or LCF. The LCF is an annual survey of 5,000 households. Each household is given an electronic diary in which they record spending and incomes in great detail. In government, the LCF is the main data source used in designing the annual budget. And I have it right here. Let's load it into Gretl. Here's Gretl again. To do that, we do File, Open Data, User File, and then we'll navigate to the place that I've stored all this data. So bear with me a second for that. That's on the file system. I'm running Linux here, so some of this will look a little bit different from you or normal people running Windows, but I'm just going to navigate to the place I've got the data, which is data OU for Open University 20J tutorial data, and there it is, LCF 171819.gdt. GDT is the default file extension for Gretl files. Cleverer people than me can probably just click on, find a data file and just click on it and get data to Gretl to start straight away. Now Gretl now looks like this. We've loaded the LCF dataset, the Living Costs and Food Survey dataset. You can think of the data as a big table, a bit like a spreadsheet if you've used those. Each row in the data is the information on one of these 5,000 households, and each column is a variable, spending on food, clothing, household goods, and so on. So we have records of some demographic information at the top. For example, numbers of children, the region someone lives in, whether a household rents or owns their house, which is their tenure type, and so on. And below that we have all these classes of spending. So food and drink, alcohol, tobacco, clothing, housing, household goods for each of the households. And we have a total income variable, which is weekly net inc. Gretl shows you the names of all the variables, as you can see. And if you right-click with your mouse over one of the variables, you get a list of all the values. So we'll go to housing, right-click, display values. And so here we're showing, in this window here, we're now showing the values of housing spending for the first 18 households in the data sets. The first one spent 32 in pounds per week. So the first one spent £32 and 32 pence on housing in the week they were surveyed, and the sixth one spent £102 on housing, and so on, all the way down to the final household, which is 5,399, who also spent £32 and 8p on housing. Housing here is things like rent, council tax, mortgage payments, and so on, all taken together. So what can we do with this? All this data. Well, one thing you'll be asked to do in the TMAs, the first of these that has this stuff in it is TMA2, is summarize the data. And you should always do this with new data, even when you're big grown-up professional people doing data science. You always start by summarizing the data. Here is the summary for our housing variable. So right-click over, and instead of display values, we're going to select summary statistics. And here's a window with the summary statistics. Now, you might not be familiar with some of the terms here, but the online tutorials will take you through many of them. For now, let's just look at this. The mean spending on housing in this data set is £70 and 64 pence per week. This is the average weekly spend on housing. The median spend is £40 and 87 pence. Half the sample have higher spending than this, and half the sample have lower spending than this. The minimum is 0. Perhaps that's free housing, or people who've paid off their mortgages. This needs investigation in a real study. Real data always throws up odd values and unexpected things. And the maximum spending on housing is £1,231 per week. I imagine that's pretty easy to run up a bill like this in central London. Next thing, let's draw a little chart for that data. So we'll draw a bar chart, a frequency chart to start off, just for this one variable. So again, right-click over it, frequency distribution, and we can just leave all these. It gives you Gretl brings up, before it brings up the graph, a big menu with all different things that you can put in this bar chart and different ways of setting it. But for now, we'll just leave all these things at their default values. And here's our very first chart from Gretl. This is a bar chart of spending on housing along here, and a count of the relative frequency, that is the proportion of things with the proportion of households that have that kind of spending up the way. And you can see that there's a very distinctive pattern with a lot of values all bunched up at the low end. And although you can't see it very, very well, a few very large values, that £1,200 maximum that we saw up at the high end, and then there are actually, if you look at it in more detail, there are actually a few in this area as well. And this pattern, with a large number of quite small values and a few big ones, is very typical of economic data. It's often a sign of economic inequality. We say data like this is skewed left. The median lower than the mean. The median lower than the mean that we saw when we did the summary statistics is a good indicator of skewed data. Some of the techniques used in the course work best with unskewed data, and you'll learn a trick, taking logs to transform skewed data into unskewed. Now back to our problem. We want to find the relationship between some of our types of household spending and total income, as in the diagram. This is quite a complicated diagram, which has spending on one good here, spending on another good or all other goods up here, and these lines, these straight lines, are supposed to represent different levels of total spending, and you plow through that when you read through week 2. But we can make a simpler one that just works just as well. Just a scatter plot that shows total income against spending on that good. To do this, we go back to Gretl. Gretl brings up a lot of windows. Every thing it does is in a different window, and it can get quite confusing finding the right one. But we're back to this thing, and we're going to do a scatter plot of spending on one particular good against total income, and that will answer this question about whether a good is normal or a luxury or an inferior good, we hope. So to do that, we're going to do view, graph specified variables, x, y, scatter, and we get a little sub-menu. So that's on the top menu, and we get a little sub-menu thing like this. My dog has just come in, so I think there may be some barking in a moment here. Come in from her evening walk. So view, graph specified variables, x, y, scatter. Just for devilment, we'll look at food spending first. So to do that, we're going to draw a graph that has total, for a technical reason, we're going to use total spending rather than total income as the explanatory variable, as the thing that goes along. That allows us to ignore savings, paying down credit cards and the like. We want a scatter plot of food spending going up the way in the graph against total expenditure along the way. So here's our total expenditure variable, and the along the way in a graph is the x-axis. So we'll put that as our x-axis variable. And on the y-axis, we want food and drink. And if we just press OK, we should get the diagram. And here it is. Each dot here, they're actually a cross, shows how much one particular household spends on food going up the way, and how much it spends in total going along the way. So a household here, for example, spends about £2,700 a week total, that's down there, of which, if you look along this axis, about £130 is on food. Now, if you also look in this graph, we have this grey line running up the middle. This line is very important. It shows the line of best fit through the data, an ordinary least squares regression line in the jargon. You'll be studying exactly what that means as the course progresses. You can think of it for now as the predicted average spending of a household for some level of total spending. And in the top corner here, you see this little equation which says y is equal to 39.1 plus 0.037 times x. That is the equation of this grey line. The 39.1 is the intercept, where the grey line is at 0 when you have 0 total spending, which is there. And the 0.037 is the slope of the line. Since y is food spending and x is total spending, you can interpret this as, for example, average food spending per someone with £1,000 total spending is 39.1 plus 0.037 times 1,000. So the x would be 1,000, so we'd be here somewhere, which is equal to it, and I encourage you to try and work this out, about £76.10 per week. So that's our average predicted spending of someone with £1,000 total spending on food. And another thing you can get from this diagram is to say that of every £1 of extra spending, this 0.037 here tells you that on average about 3.7 pence of that extra £1 extra spending is spent on food. Since food spending rises with total spending but quite slowly, we would classify food as a normal good in terms of this classification and diagram here. Let me get Gretl back. Let's try one more. Let's try alcohol and tobacco. So the same rigmarole, we're going to go view, graph specified variables, x, y scatter as before. And again, we're going to put total expenditure as the x-axis, but this time we're going to put alcohol and tobacco as the y-axis. And you get this. Again, because this line is sloping upwards, we can see that alcohol and tobacco is a slightly normal good. That is, it slightly increases spending on these things as total spending goes up. But you can see from the equation up here that the slope is much shallower. So it only goes up very slightly as total spending goes up. So alcohol and tobacco too is a normal good, but only just. It's kind of on the cusp of being an inferior good, one that total spending goes down on as spending on which goes down on as total spending goes up. And that's important to know in the real world, when you're designing a budget or you're advocating for health or libertarianism or whatever your thing is. It's important to know that because alcohol and tobacco are taxed very heavily, and because spending only goes up very slightly with income, the share of this for low income people or low total spending people is going to be much higher than for high spending people. So a tax on it will be regressive. It will impact proportionately on low low-income people more than on high-income people. And we might therefore be worried about the distributional effects of this. Perhaps we want to raise a social security thing to compensate for any increase in the tax on these things. So, that gives you, I hope, a flavour of what Gretl has to offer. In the course you'll study all this in much more detail, especially the ordinary least squares line. And at the end of the course you'll get the option to complete an econometrics project, and then we can get really stuck into this stuff. And I hope this was just a little bit useful for you. Good night.